Okay, so let's talk right at the start, Kelly. Why do women struggle for answers around their hormonal upheavals?
I think they struggle for many reasons. Unfortunately, their first go-to is going to be their doctor, and they're always going to be disappointed with that interaction because their doctor doesn't have the answers that they're seeking. However, I always explain to them, you don't necessarily want what they're going to give you anyways, because you don't want the side effects of medication. I think the other thing is that there's not a lot of actual women's health experts out there that really know how to guide them. And for me, the third piece is they need to engage with a woman, someone that's gone through menopause, that knows what they're going through, that really can understand what their struggles are.
Yeah, no, well said. So when we're talking about the three phases or seasons of menopause, right? We've
Yeah.
got peri, we've got meno, and we've got post. So is there a best time for hormonal support, and how does a woman know where she's at in those phases?
I think the best time is peri.
Okay.
However, most women won't think of it at that time. We're just too busy, or we don't have any foresight of what's going to happen when we get into our 50s. Perhaps we just kind of hope for the best, but that to me is the ideal time, because as you progress, I think it gets more challenging. You look at a woman in their 60s now, and perhaps they have other underlying, disease states that they're dealing with on top of menopause. So it gets more complicated for them.
Right. And so what are the first signs for women? I mean, because here we have to talk lifestyle, we have to talk food and exercise, all that stuff, right?
Right.
Stresses for the average woman.
Yeah.
But can they differentiate, or is that part of what you do? Can they differentiate between this is just what's happening in my world, or this is hormonal stuff? How do we know?
I think when the symptoms become persistent, then
Okay.
they start to recognize that it's not a simple phase that they're going through, that there are really some dramatic changes that are going on to their body, and they do start to recognize that there is a hormone piece for sure.
And so I have a lot of women coming to me, as I'm sure you do, who are already out of menopause.
Yeah.
Is it too late, or can they get support? Because do we need support from, say, 60 onward for our health with hormones if we've already gone through menopause?
I don't think it's ever too late. I think it's still important for them to recognize that those hormones are still driving the ship, whether they like it or not. And sometimes, as you've seen with clients, in their 60s, maybe they go through an unexpected, very stressful event that even throws them off even more, because now the emotional side is really taking over what's going on to them physically.
Right, right. So when women come to you, I know that there's different groups that come to you, but when they come to you, what is the biggest group? What are their complaints? Do they even know that they're in hormonal stuff? What do you see the most at this point?
Well, I mean, most women come to me when they're in their 50s. Do they know they're in menopause? They do if they've gone 12 months without a cycle. Some of them, yeah, there's commonalities, and there's different degrees of symptoms depending on that person and their history. So what I see most commonly is hot flashes, night sweats, insomnia, low libido, joint pain, moodiness, irritability. It can become quite dramatic for them, actually.
Right, right. Because yes, so those things are so big with women. So we talk about increased belly fat is a huge one. I hear that a lot. I'm gaining it, but I'm always gaining it around the middle. That's a big one. They can't get the weight off. What they used to do doesn't work anymore. They can't get the weight off. Their set point increases, meaning where their body's holding a weight is now higher. They have poor sleep. They have increased in stress. Their immune system is downregulated. They're getting sick more. They can't recover from training or exercise, or even just a busy day at the office. So there's a lot of stuff going on with women, right? So is part of what you do pinpointing those factors, or how do you work with so much that's happening in a woman's body when she comes to you?
I think the first thing you do is you listen. You have to let them tell their story. I I probably know what certain chapters are in that book for them, but I want them to tell their story and to tell me what symptoms are, more accentuated for them than others. And as you said, body image is a big deal. And it's really sad because a lot of them, by the time they come to me, they're just really uncomfortable in their own skin. They don't feel like themselves.
Mhm.
They don't even like looking in the mirror anymore, which I think is really sad.
Yeah, I hear women saying, I want to take the photo instead of being in the photo. I don't want to shop for new clothes. Some women don't, they even start downsizing their social outings. They don't want to
Yeah.
go out because they don't feel good how they look. Or when they go out, they're always eating the perpetual salad, right? And then they're starving and then they go home. And so this is where we go into, of course, movement and food. I mean, that's a huge piece of this, right? It has to be. That's where I come from. And what I've seen in my experience is the longer you've been eating well, sustainably, not going up and down on diets, and the longer you've been training, specifically with weight training, because us aging women, that we need to major in that, there seems to be less hormonal swings in the women I work with who have done that for decades. Do you find that?
Well, like you and I have always talked about the 4 pillars.
Yeah.
So yes, it's not just hormone balance, it's not just exercise, it's not just nutrition and stress management. It's all 4 of those,
Mhm.
right? Because someone, could be exercising, but their hormones aren't balanced.
Mhm.
Someone could be going through an extremely stressful time in their life. So there's 4 pillars that really need to line up. And I don't think you can crank one more than the other. You look at them individually and make sure that they're all aligned with each other.
And that's also where the mindset piece is so important as well, whether it's meditation or
Yes.
your journaling or whatever. And I love when you say, because that's what I do, is when women come to me, I need to hear their story. Number one, it
Yeah.
gives them relief because they're being validated and heard, which a lot of practitioners don't offer, a lot of doctors don't. And it allows you to understand the full picture of the person, because we're not just a bunch of walking hormones. And I think a lot of practitioners, that's the first thing they go to, is they'll put out a treatment without coming to know. And a lot of them aren't educated either in looking at the whole perspective, right? And it's so important. And that's where the time invested between coach and client is important, right?
Well, I love the engagement and I love the stories and I love the transparency that they're willing to trust both of us to share that story, knowing that we're going to understand where they're coming from at this time. There's a lot of self-judgment, and we know that. And there's a lot of um, self-esteem issues, even going out, maybe feeling uncomfortable that people are judging, how they're looking at that time in their life. Because a lot of society would just say, well, they're eating too much. Well, that's not true, actually.
Yeah.
That is not necessarily true by any means.
Yeah,
It's-
exactly. And then I always say you can't build health or a healthy outlook if you're down in shame and guilt and frustration, right? And that's where so many women live for decades. And
Well,
that's
it
the hardest
creates
thing.
it creates so much resistance around what their goals are.
Mhm.
And I think what I always encourage them to do is to ask for what you want. Don't be scared to ask for what you want. You don't have to accept what your doctor is saying, that this is just part of aging. Like, that's got to be the hardest statement for a woman to hear.
And because that also puts us into looking at aging as a negative, looking at hormones as a negative, and they're life affirming. That's the way I've always seen it. And yes, we go through the change. How we go through the change doesn't mean we have to white knuckle it like my mama did, or like a lot of women of that generation did. We have a lot more, different options, but I find women are talking more about it amongst each other, but still not as much as I'd like to see. What's your take on that?
I wish they would talk more. I really think that's important, again, to share stories and share experiences. Maybe they just don't have that comfort zone. And again, they maybe feel like judgment.
Mhm.
However, understand that, as you and I talked about, whatever their friend has used does not necessarily mean that
Mhm.
that's going to be the right treatment plan for them. So
And
it
how you're,
always comes back. They're an individual, they're unique, their history
yeah.
is unique.
Yeah. And how their mama went through it isn't how they're going to go through it either. I've learned that. My mother's like, what's wrong with you? But she also was the one that would have the fan like this and just going, whoo, right? And I remember seeing that and thinking, thank goodness I'm in this day and age with options to choose, and recognizing though too, because there still is a big secrecy around it where we don't even want to share, because I think the hormones reflect the body and aging. And this is where I'm always about aging is a beautiful thing. And
Yeah.
if we're in resistance to it, we're creating that very stress in the body and the brain that won't allow our hormones to align properly with support, and won't allow our bodies to lose the weight, because it's in that resistance phase. And this is where too, women like us, we walk the walk. We're not, God love all the male practitioners and doctors and naturopaths. They're great, but they haven't walked the walk. And a lot of women aren't going to be comfortable telling their story. There's no kinship there, right? And I think that's a big piece of having, I always say, if you are wanting to change your body or your life, find a mentor that's doing what you're doing and living the way you're living, to be able to lead you, because she's your mentor. She's doing it and she knows it. She knows the challenge, she knows the highs, she knows the pitfalls. She has lived it for a lot of years. And I think that's the value of having old women like us.
Well, yeah, I mean, you have to see the results, right?
Right.
No one's going to come to me if I'm overweight. No one's going to come to me if I'm not projecting what I'm teaching.
Yeah.
Like
Yeah.
that's super important, and I never would want to be that person anyways.
If you're not walking the walk. And so I always say, us coaches, teachers, mentors, we have a huge responsibility to live the life because that we're promoting, because and we are the evidence. And there's a lot of us coming out because women are getting more engaged. I would love to see women start earlier, because I hear women talking about, and again, it can be very, very subjective, because we are meaning making machines. So we're always making stories around stuff. And I recognize that for sure. But some women in their 30s start to feel a dip. Now, we don't know if it's life changes. It could be stress. It could be a hard marriage. It could be a job that's not fulfilling. But in their 30s and 40s, we can have that as well. So how often do you see that, Kelly?
Not as often as I would like to be honest. I mean, I've treated women in their 20s, but
Wow.
picture women in their 30s, a little different than us. They're still at that point probably of having children. So, and then they're going to face some challenges with that because their hormones could be out of balance.
Mm-hmm.
So I think they're just too preoccupied at that time to think about it, unless they have a very specific diagnosis that sends them out searching for answers, like, maybe PCOS, for
Yes.
example, or endometriosis.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, in my 30s, did I think about hormones? No, I didn't.
Yeah.
I was very busy having children.
Yeah.
And bringing up,
Yeah.
and
Buying a house. Yeah. All that stuff.
yeah, and the other piece which is good that we always emphasize to women, is a self-care piece, because that was something that, it was always put on the back burner for women, and now we're coming forward to say, no, I want to be committed. I want to be accountable. I want these changes in my life. I want to be healthy. I mean, yes, of course I want to release weight, but the underlying purpose of that really is to stay healthy, to avoid diabetes and other disease states and medication.
Right. And so living well too is not just about not having disease states. It is about living with energy, vitality, joy, balance, all that stuff, right?
Well, there's so many pieces though.
Yes.
How do you motivate a woman to exercise when she's not sleeping well?
Mm-hmm.
I mean, it all really goes hand in hand for them. And I'm always encouraging the exercise piece, because I've done it my whole life. I know the importance of that. I know how good it makes us feel.
Yeah. Yeah. It's my cornerstone for sure. So let's step into, we did a little bit, the emotional landscape. What I know that's a big one with hormones. And I felt the shift probably in my 40s. Life was busy. I have a special needs son, marriage, work, all that kind of stuff. And I remember thinking, is this just the way it is? Until I kind of worked on getting my hormones reset as well. And I remember thinking, oh my gosh, the sun's shining. And I think the challenge is things slip so little that you don't notice it until you get them back. And then it's like, whoa, and this is where we're supposed to be living and operating from. And you just get that lift. So what do you see emotionally? We talked a little bit about frustration and anger and all that stuff, but is there a point emotionally where you can say you need some support here, or how do we differentiate that from life?
That's a complicated question.
Yeah,
I mean,
yeah.
I think everyone has their tipping point. I look at, my life in my mid-40s was, a 30-year marriage exploding, which obviously affected me emotionally and physically.
Mhm,
So one thing I always teach women, you support yourself physically, you're going to start feeling better emotionally.
mhm,
Not
mhm,
saying I can solve all the world's problems for you. However, you'll have a lot more clarity of
mhm,
mind to make
mhm.
whatever decisions you need to make at that time. Get rid of the brain fog, for example, and really have a better perspective on life, and
Yeah.
then see where you land emotionally.
Right, right, right. Get that little up leveling. What about women? We have a lot of women who have had surgeries,
Yeah.
whether they've, right, and it seems to be that generation um seems to, I don't know how it's changed. I don't know the stats on it, but there seems to have been a lot of hysterectomies, for example, in the province where I'm at. I think it's one of the highest in Canada, actually. And so that's going to change things. And then some women have partial, some women keep their ovaries. So does that obviously would play a part in the hormonal profiles,
Oh,
right?
yeah, it plays a huge part for them.
Yeah, yeah.
Especially if they go into surgical menopause, there's no time frame to prepare their body for that. They really have no idea what it's going to look like on the other side. And then there's that misconception, I believe, from the doctor telling them that their ovaries are still working. Well, that's kind of like a TV that's unplugged. So, I mean, you only have so much hormone left in your ovaries, or one ovary, and then
Yeah.
that starts to deplete itself, and then you transition into adrenal fatigue, and then
Mhm.
you're in trouble on that side.
And then yeah, and that would be my next question, is when we look at all of the inward stuff of women, we got the adrenals, the thyroid, the thymus. Um, are they all connected? And is there a pathway where if one is low, then the others in a little numerical state, or how does that work? Because some women, their adrenals are low or their thyroid is low. Is there a starting point for all of that?
Well, I always say the starting point is the saliva test to look at all the hormones,
Right.
because you're going to love this question. One of my clients this week said, well, why am I going to do all this if it's just about my cortisol? Well,
Oh,
and I had to explain to her, it's not just about one hormone, it's about how they all interact together. Your cortisol's high or low, it affects your thyroid. You have high body fat, maybe your estrogen is high, which affects your thyroid. So it's all, as you said, it's all linked to each other.
mm-hmm.
Um, you're not looking at it the way a doctor would to say, well, it's just your thyroid.
Right. Yeah,
What about
because they're
everything
like from
else?
A to, yeah, they're from A to B, right? They're looking at the diseased or the malfunctioning of specific area. That's just what they know, right?
Well, yeah, and no disrespect to them,
Yeah.
that's just how they're trained. But
Mm-hmm.
imagine a woman, two women, one goes the doctor route and ends up on Synthroid or Altroxin, and
Mm-hmm.
the other one steps back and says, I'm going to go the supplement route. Like, what is the most successful course of action? Because
Mm-hmm.
the woman that ends up on Synthroid for 20 years has actually almost brought her thyroid to a bit of a halt now, because it's dependent on that drug.
Right. The use it or lose it thing,
Absolutely.
right? If you're not using it, yes, I see that. Whoops, I see that so much, and I see that in um, women getting more frustrated as well. I know people that have been on it for 20, 30 years as well, and I think a lot of doctors also see with weight gain, oh, it's your thyroid because it's your metabolism, but they're not losing weight when they're on the thyroid medication.
No, or they test their thyroid and they say it's fine. And I would say, well, it's not fine because you're in menopause. Like it can't be fine. If it was fine, you wouldn't have any of the symptoms that you have.
Right,
However,
right,
if they're telling you you're not in disease state, that's great. You
right.
know, let's do
Yeah,
something else about it.
but there's a long path between superior health and disease, right?
Yes,
And that's where we need to get into,
absolutely.
right? And
The
stop
earlier
it
the
and
earlier
build
the
it up.
better.
Yeah,
Yeah, the earlier the better,
yeah.
for sure.
Cortisol. Everybody's talking cortisol. It's
I
like
know.
the fad thing. Okay. So a few years ago, I had somebody ask me, oh, what was it about us older women should be high fat? I remember when fat was demonized in the 90s. Do you remember that? Everything was low fat. And then
Right.
now we're in a love affair with fat, but maybe a little too much. And she was eating, oh, I don't know how many grams of fat, but I'm like, okay, there is a formula here.
Right?
Still, calories matter, right? And
Yeah.
so, what about, let's talk cortisol first, because that seems to be the big thing. Everything's being blamed on cortisol. And sometimes I'm a little bit abrupt in saying, you got to look at your training, your food first and foremost, and then we can move
Well,
into other stuff. How, like, I know that the hormones affect, but where do you sit with all of this that's come out in the last few years?
again, I'm on the same page as you. You can't blame it on one thing. Our body doesn't work that way. Life doesn't work that way. However, what I'm teaching women is always going back to the science. Understand the science of what you're eating, how it affects your cortisol, how it affects your insulin levels. That's the piece that's important to me, is not, don't just blame it on your cortisol. Understand what is happening when you're not perhaps eating properly.
Right. Yeah.
Maybe it takes your body 3 days to recover from that piece of sugar.
Mm-hmm.
And I think if you frame it that way, like from an educational standpoint, then
Mm-hmm.
they grasp it better. We're not saying, deprive yourself. We're just saying understand what's going on with your body when you eat that way.
Right. So you can have a choice. You can be conscious,
And
right?
some women react more than others. Like they really,
Right.
everybody's chemistry is different.
Right. And cortisol and insulin are not the bad boys of the body, which I
Oh, I
hear
know
a
them.
lot because they're extremely valuable. And again, they've been demonized. And I remember years ago when I was in the health food field, there was a company that came out with a product that apparently went straight to the belly fat to remove it off the body. And I'm like, oh, no.
Well, unfortunately, we're highly marketed with these things.
Yes. Yeah.
So I always call it the Wild West of the health food store.
Yeah.
And-
Oh,
But
sure.
obviously one thing is not gonna fix everything, obviously. There's a
Right.
lot going on there. You can't take one supplement and think the world's gonna explode tomorrow. It's not.
Yeah, and that's that marketing spin, right? And unfortunately, many people want the simple fix because they're tired, they're frustrated, and the marketing is, oh no, just take this one pill or supplement and it will help. Being in the health food store, I was shocked at the people that were coming in expecting us being paid minimum wage with not as much training as I would have liked to be their so-called alternative doctor.
I know
And that
it's
still is a
very.
mentality as well, right? And that is where education is really important. But Kelly, a lot of people don't want to be educated though. They're just like, it's still the same mentality as going to the doctor and saying, fix me. They go
Well,
into a health food store and say, fix me. But that education piece, how much of your time is spent on educating women?
a
All of
lot of
it.
time, that's what we do. We keep educating them. And what you experience in their health food store, I call it the herb of the month mentality. But and it's okay, again, no judgment. Obviously, people are trying to get healthy.
Mhm.
And that's why they're going that route. But similar to you, as a pharmacist and an expert, I would feel scared almost for people to take the advice of a retail clerk that
Mhm.
doesn't know their health, doesn't know what medication they're on, any kind of disease states that they have. I think that's the alarming piece to me.
Yeah, absolutely. And because it's all just so splintered out there, right? And that also is confusing to women for sure, because there's so many options. But I think the biggest challenge I come across, and I'd love your input on this, is the Google searches, the info junkies, right? And I'm like, we got to detox that brain. We got to get that stuff out so that you can hear what we're saying. And the info junkies and the Google searches, when I take women on as clients, they have to promise not to do the Google searches, not to ask family and friends, right? Because it muddies the water, and it's like information is not transformation or education.
Well, I always say to women, I wouldn't buy anything off the internet.
Yeah.
I really
Thank
wouldn't,
you.
unless for some reason, I know that company, I've worked with them, or, I'm familiar with their product lines, but other than that, I would not buy anything off the internet, because you don't know where it's coming from. You don't know really what's in it. You don't know what the quality control is. I think it's pretty scary. And kind of, just stepping back a little bit to what you were talking about, is the person that is only going to the health food store and only going to Google, I don't think they're ready to make changes. They're not ready for that commitment, because they're thinking that, as you said, it's a simple process, and it's not. There's too many pieces, there's too many moving pieces to the puzzle, really.
Yeah. And you have to be willing to invest. That's time, resources, money, right? And that's a big piece of it. You have to have longevity in the game with your
Yes.
culture practitioner. Really, really important. And I think more and more women are coming to that realization. But you're right, there's still the other cohort that is just, unless they want to change how they're approaching things and really be open to change and take the time and be part of the solution, and it's just not going to work, right? Because we're not here just to dole out. Like I always say, if they're just coming for calories or macros, I'm not their girl, because that's out there, and it doesn't make use of my skill set, but it's also not serving them. But there's still a lot of that out there. So do you bother trying to educate, or do you just kind of move away and say, you know what, she's just not ready to invest at the level we need?
Yeah, I don't think I should ever justify it to them.
Yeah.
So this is who I am. This is what I know. I've been doing this for a very long time. Like you, I know I'm making a difference in women's lives, and I'm very proud of that. But they have to be ready for that.
And they have to want to invest in their health,
Well,
like
absolutely.
truly invest, right?
Well, that's a whole different topic again.
Yep.
Because maybe they're not the person at home managing the finances. Like, we don't know what that piece is for them. And I think, again, in their mind, they're thinking about a little bit of self-worth, unfortunately, of investing in themselves.
Right.
Am I worthy of that?
Right.
I don't think it's the money. I think most times
Absolutely.
it's, am I worthy of this?
Yeah, that's the underlying. And the other one is fear of change, right? I mean, better the devil you know than the devil you don't. And so when we look at the psychology of fear and change, getting out of your comfort zone is necessary for you to learn and grow. And if there's not a little bit of fear, then you're not really going to change. You're not going to grow. And so this is a big piece of what I do, is trying to coach women into understanding fear is natural. Being out of your comfort zone is a requirement. And when you get comfortable with being uncomfortable, you're going to make huge strides in your health, in your learning, and your growing, right? That's all just part of what we do as coaches.
Well, I always say to them, with growth comes discomfort, expect it.
Yeah.
And don't expect every day to be perfect. And just, again, frame it for yourself. I'm not depriving myself. I'm making really solid choices for a reason.
Right. And I think the important thing is just looking at where you are right now, and then offering women a possibility of where they can live, how they can feel, how they can look, how they can operate, how they can age beautifully, right?
As I said, I always say, ask for what you want, because sometimes they're scared. If they have a weight loss goal, if their real weight loss goal is 75 pounds, are they going to say that? No, they're probably going to cut it in half, because in their mind, they just think that's so far off the grid that they'll never get there.
Right.
And it's interesting. I've seen that happen so many times with women.
So they're already shortchanging their success.
Yeah, they reach their short-term goal and then they're stuck with me and I go, okay, what
Right.
are we doing, right?
Yeah,
Obviously,
yeah. Let's bring that other foot in now.
right, yeah, right.
Okay.
Obviously you didn't ask for what you wanted because we're still together.
Yeah, I love that. I think that's great. And what I always say is when you make the decision today, the crossroads moment is today. And when we say, well, maybe tomorrow I'll think about it, then there's no commitment. But if you make the decision today, you wake up tomorrow and you're already on a new path. And in a week, a month, a year, you're already claimed your life and living in a new way, right?
Well,
And it all becomes a
yeah,
decision.
I would say to women, there's no perfect time except when you're ready. I
Yeah.
mean, I've had women commit to making changes at Christmas time, which
Oh.
and I'm really taken back, but I don't say anything because if they're ready, they're ready.
Yeah,
Because
exactly.
like there's always a vacation, an anniversary, a birthday, a
Mhm.
celebration going on that can, again, put their needs on the back burner of what they really want to see for themselves.
Mhm, mhm. But that's life. We work around it, right? Because that's part of it. And like you say, there's no perfect time to manage your health. The perfect time is when you're ready, and we don't wait for. I had one lady, I love her to death, but she said, "Well, I don't want to do your program because summer's coming, and I want to be on the boat all summer, and we, drink and have fun." I'm like, okay. And then summer was over and she called and she said, well, Labor Day is coming. And so I'm
Oh
going to
my
wait till after
goodness.
Labor Day because we have a party. And then she said, well, maybe I should wait till after Christmas. And I said to her, do you see what you're doing? And she laughed and she went, yeah, I'm trying to create the perfect time for change. And I said, exactly. So that was the mindset piece we had to work on. I'm still waiting for her to call. I don't know what
She
celebration,
will.
or I don't know what is happening now, but it's
She
just like,
will. When she,
right?
believe me, a lot of times women circle me for a while before they engage.
Yeah,
I always find that, very, very interesting.
yes,
But the other thing with this client or potential client is that unfortunately, a lot of life is centered around food.
mm-hmm,
Food and alcohol, and I'm not judging, but everything is centered around that. And how do you take that piece out and just embrace being with whoever you're with without having to overindulge in foods that aren't good for you?
right, right. And again, I think a lot of that comes back to the respect of our body and our health, and getting to a place of I want to instead of I have to. Because I always say with the body, we're either coming from a prison sentence or from right, pain or pleasure. That's all it is. And how you paint it and what you're saying to yourself. And this is where, so many women with hormones, again, going back to what we talked about earlier, they're like, it's awful, I hate it, blah, 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 blah. It's like, no. This is what mainstream kind of pins it as. And everybody's regurgitating that it's aging is awful and it's hard and stressful and
Um,
you can't lose the weight. I might as well just be here. No, it's not true. Right?
Well, unfortunately, some women end up over medicated too, because
Yes.
that's what their doctor has to offer them, and that becomes
Mhm.
a big piece of their inability of motivation to make changes.
Absolutely.
Because their body's so far off balance again.
Yeah. And there's also challenges with immune system. I see that a
Yeah.
lot, women getting more sick, not having recovery, like I talked about, whether it's training or even just life, they just don't have the good spot anymore to pick themselves up. But the immune system seems to take a big hit as well. And isn't it true that when our hormones are out of whack, that's when some of our greatest disease states can come in?
Well, I had a client yesterday that her health is unbelievable. And what I said to her is that, unfortunately, when you come into menopause in the place that you are
Mhm.
with some really serious, health issues, it's going to be a bigger struggle because her immune system is not good. And that for me, I call it kind of like a cleanup. Like for women, you start by balancing the hormones, but really you're balancing many things at that time. And then the cleanup to me is then you start going down the road of their immune system, knowing that you're also going to help to maintain that foundation of hormone balance by doing that for them. But
Right.
a lot of women, you know, without educating them, wouldn't understand that.
Right. And they would keep doing the same old, right?
Yes, however, this lady did admit, you know, like we're saying, there's emotional issues to every disease state too.
Yes, yes, yes,
Yes, you know,
yes.
and it's been a big learning in my life, you know, and working with people coming from the pharmacy background where I thought everything was black and white, and it's really not. It's very gray.
Right. And I always say all the learning and growing is in the grays, but we like the certainty of black and white, right?
Right.
And allowing yourself to just not know the answer is sometimes where we need to be to stay curious and open, right?
Well, I always say everybody has their tipping point too, right?
Yeah.
You can go along, you can only go so far, you know, thinking, for example, that you're gonna get through menopause without any issues. And then all of a sudden, there's a tipping point where
Right.
something happens to your health or something happens in your life emotionally. And
Mhm,
you really like, and it happens almost fast.
mhm.
But it wasn't happening fast, it was progressing to that point.
Right, right. Yeah. The accumulation of too much weight, emotional, whatever
Weight,
kind of weight. Yes.
emotional,
Yeah.
stress, you name it.
Yeah, because it
Right,
doesn't just happen, does it? And I hear women say that, well, I think it started happening and they'll have a date. And I'm like, whoa, I wish I had that certainty. But there was a
right,
date because there is a big challenge or some kind of fall in their world, an emotional challenge. I get that. There probably is. But again, that, micromanaging piece is kind of a comfort level for some people to have. You know how it is when some people don't feel well and they go to the doctor and they get a name for their state or their disease and they feel better,
right.
right? And
Yeah,
it's
I know, well, they, but you know what, in my life, in my world, I find women are very validated when they actually get that accurate
yes,
hormone test from me that really helps to explain to them why
yes,
they are, you know, where they are at this time. And
yes,
like you're saying, it didn't like, you know, menopause didn't just happen overnight.
yeah.
I mean, I just think often we're just too distracted and busy to recognize that we don't have
Mhm.
time.
Yes, and then if we haven't been able to maintain our healthy eating plan, be consistent, not do the diets, being able to train accordingly, minimize
Yeah,
the cardio as we get older, ladies, and
yeah,
and boost
right,
up the weight training, which supports healthy organs, healthy
right.
hormonal profiles, all that stuff. But we just get so caught up, and then what happens is we end up beating up on ourselves. We're so good at self-policing ourselves, and that is just a habit that we learned from a long time ago that we have to ditch to the curb as far as I'm
Well,
concerned.
that's what goes into the coaching and the mindset piece, like,
Hmm.
hey,
Yeah,
because a lot of women, and we all do it, we have some limited beliefs
yeah,
that
yeah,
are
for sure.
gonna affect our, either our outcome or the longevity of our outcome.
Yeah, yeah, and that's the biggest piece of what we do, as well as educating women on our areas of expertise. The
Yeah,
mindset piece, absolutely, and I think that comes with age and wisdom. But again,
wisdom
also,
for sure.
yeah, yeah, and all
Wisdom,
the hits along the way, but also being committed to our own health, mental and physical and emotional health is a huge piece of what I know you do as well as me, and that is what coaching is really about. It's coaching is meeting the person where they're at, and I always say coaching changes the client. It's supposed to allow them to see from a higher perspective and then taking their life from there, and that's the beauty of what we get to do. And the training and the food and the hormonal support is the strategy piece that we can put into this beautifully elevated woman, right?
well, after doing this for 25 years, I'm still grateful and, you know,
Yes.
impressed with the outcomes, right?
Yeah.
It's really, it really embraces you,
Yep.
you know, to see someone maybe over 3 to 6 months and see how much their body can change, and just the way they look, their energy, how they feel
Hmm.
about themselves. It's
Hmm.
really transformational to watch that.
Hmm. Yep. Changing lives one woman at a time. That's all it takes, right? That's why we're here. I love it.
Right. I love it too.
Beautiful. Anything else? Any final philosophical words, Kelly?
Philosophical words. Let's say, see, hormone imbalance will not go away on its own. That's all I'm gonna say to women. If
Right.
you're not doing something to support that foundation,
Hmm.
it's just gonna get progressive. And that's where we end up going down the road, unfortunately, of disease states. So
Right.
I'm just encouraging women, embrace that time in your life and make some really positive changes for yourself.
Right. Because it will not fix itself.
Yeah.
And the decision is now, is no better time than now. Right. Because like you say, the longer you leave it, the harder it is, but also the habits and the way we think gets more ingrained too. I can do this myself. I can toughen it out myself. You don't need to. You really don't need to. And that's where quality mentorship and coaching and the skill set and the toolkit come in. So
I'm always intrigued sometimes when women say to me about the saliva test, well, what if my hormones are normal?
you'll be
I would say, well, that's impossible, right?
yeah.
Otherwise, we would not be having this conversation.
Right. Oh, that's beautiful. I
Yeah.
love it. I love it. Thank you, my friend. Blessings to
Well, you
you.
too, Karen. Lovely.
Okay. All right.
Thank you.
Be
Okay, take
well.
care. Okay, bye now.